Give me a little intro there, Gomer.
There's no turning back now.
Let's put on the show.
You are listening to the Station 71 podcast. My name is Mario, and this week I'm joined by my co-host,
Brian?
And Kirsten.
So we've got a surprise Imagineering spotlight that Brian has prepared for us this week. I'm surprised because I didn't know who this was about until like yesterday, I think, when you told us. But very interested to learn about this surprise Imagineer that we have. As always, let's dive into some of our news first before we talk about any of that. So this week we have the news that the Creation Shop and Club Cool are set to open on September 15th at Epcot. At the time of recording this, that will be just a few days away. It should be the week that this comes out, which is very exciting.
Take all my money.
Will say, yes, I like the new line of stuff that they're coming out with, this new Epcot Light and Color collection. Very slick design, I think. But I don't know. I don't like this getting changed to Creation Shop. Mouse Gear was such a cool name and cool just like design, and I hate that they're moving away from that.
I'm so in the vein of like Mouse Gear and all of that. I'm very interested because I feel like this is like in line with the whole revamp of Epcot thing, right? Like that's where most of the ideas for this whole thing stem from. And what's interesting is I feel like we're probably not going to get that full revamp that they talked about just because COVID and everything. But I'm interested to see how this like ties in with everything else.
Yeah.
Like if we get everything that they said, it'll be fine. This will blend in nice. But like if we get chunks of it, it's gonna be very jarring.
Yeah. And after seeing Epcot the last time I went there, it'll be good for stuff to just start opening back up again.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Last time I went, it was like a maze of construction walls.
Yes, I was about to say it literally felt like you were being guided through a maze because I mean, like everything is just wooden boards the entire way around Future World right now.
Speaking of Epcot and Future World, we've got the news that Living with the Land has reopened. If you've
Super
been following,
exciting.
Yeah, if you've been following the news around any of the Disney parks, Living with the Land was closed for about 11 days. Apparently, there was an issue with it being up to fire code. That's the rumor I was hearing.
See, I heard
There
something
doesn't seem to be any.
about like brakes.
God.
That's what I heard, that there was some mechanical system on the ride that was not operating correctly.
And I also heard that there was a
Which-
roof leak. Like, I think nobody's ever going to know.
Well, the roof leak was part of what I had heard, was that there was a roof leak that was dripping onto something that could have potentially been a fire hazard. Which I think you're right. Nobody's ever going to know. But the point of me bringing that all up is that I know there was the rumor that they were putting some kind of barricade or something up, but it's nice to see that they don't have that up still. And
Yes.
guests have not ruined this experience yet.
Yes,
Yet.
people, stop jumping off of Living with the Land. Just ride it and enjoy it.
If you want a cucumber, do the behind the scenes tour.
Yes, it's like $15. Yes, an expensive cucumber, but it's not that bad.
If you're doing the behind the scenes tour just for the cucumber, I
You're
think
doing
you've got
it
bigger
wrong.
problems.
But it's good to see that this was open. I don't know if y'all saw it, but there were a couple little inklings of like, oh, well, they're gonna close it down now and everything. And I think it was just Disney's social media getting out of hand and the rumor mill getting kicked up, and
Yeah.
But looks like it's here to stay, so that's good.
Yeah, that's the hope. Next thing that we have on here is that there are some updates to the Disney Park reservation system. Looks like, honestly, they seem minor mostly here. Let me just reread this news story so I'm not,
I feel like it really affects
babbling about something I
annual
don't quite
pass
remember.
holders more than anyone else, right?
That's what it looks like.
And I mean, it's a good thing because y'all can have more than one reservation.
Yeah, which it depends on what level of pass you get to as to how many reservations it's going to let you make.
What I find interesting about this news story before like even dissecting it is it's all super vague, right? Like a lot of this seems very much like I want to say PR speak, but like it seems very much like they're like, we are making changes to make this better, but there's not really anything major here besides, like you said, there's the option to make one at a future date.
Well, the one good thing for pass holders with this is that it's saying that it will allow you to make a reservation for any available date in the future during the pass validity period. So that's pretty cool. I do like that because it will allow the few times of the year that I really want to plan ahead for like a special occasion, for a holiday, or if I know somebody is coming to visit later on, that will be very handy. It's nice to see them kind of throw us a bone with something when it seems like most of the time we're getting left out of perks.
Yeah. I feel like the more I look at the annual pass stuff, the more I feel for you as a Florida resident.
Well, the other thing too is it's become very confusing and convoluted. Like I know I had complaints about it before with, the reservation windows and everything, but at least it was pretty concise and clear and you knew what it was. It's like every article I read about this, I have to reread and it seems like it's new information that's coming out every day about this, and it's a lot.
And what's crazy is I feel like this is such a weird thing to kind of like step into the next news segment and talk about Disney Genie a little bit again. I feel like there's so much being said about it in I don't even want to say like a bad way, because it is kind of a bad way, but it's not all negative. But I feel like if you're not just looking at it from like what it is and you hear the things that are out there about all of these changes, they seem super drastic, which they kind of are. Like a lot of the reservation system stuff is a lot more different than it was pre-COVID, and the annual pass holder system that we're about to talk about is structured way differently, and the fact that you now have to pay for fast passes once they start coming back is different. But it feels like there's such like a negative light around it that it makes it even more confusing.
Yeah,
It's
there's definitely that too. But I feel like Disney has always been like, when compared to other vacations, harder to plan, which is why third party travel agents have been so popular with Disney over the years. And I feel like if you're a Disney travel agent right now, this is the best news in the world for you, because this seems damn near impossible for the average person to just plan a trip now.
Well, and also other trips, if you're like really doing something unusual, I feel like other, I don't know, kind of those big once in a lifetime trips, like they're hard to plan too, because we were planning on going to Japan, and then I ended up meeting Cher, and then COVID happened, whatever. But like even thinking about planning that, it's like a lot of work, and I'm like, whoa, this is complicated. Like maybe I need help with this. It's not like just going to the beach and putting your butt in a beach chair and sitting there for a week, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like
But at least
what? Go
like
ahead.
with the trip like that though, is that you're kind of like doing your own thing in different areas. So like it makes sense why you would have to spend so much time planning that. But like you could stay on Disney property like for the entirety of your trip, and it still feels like there is so much planning that has to go involved with that, which you would think would be the easiest thing to just say, okay, I'm staying at Disney. I'll pick when I want to go, what hotel I want to stay at, and what days I want to go to the park. And now there's a lot more stuff to doing that.
I mean, it's been pretty complicated like that for a while. I would say Disney is definitely not like I mean compared to something like going to the beach, right? Like you said, Kirsten said that going to the beach is like an easy vacation. You just know what you're doing. You pick it up, you go. I would definitely say that of the parks, Disney has had more moving pieces in the last couple of years than any of them.
Yeah.
I mean, even a trip to Universal is probably significantly easier to plan than a trip to Disney. Now that's definitely a different trip, but I don't know. Along with these changes though, I guess now is a good time to talk about the annual passes. Starting, I guess, technically tomorrow at the time of recording this, the new annual passes will go on sale. They have 4 different passes, one of which is only available to non-Florida residents. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Again,
Yeah.
you probably know better than I do right now. I'm
The
trying to
other
figure it
one-
out myself.
The Sorcerer's Pass is either Florida residents or DVC members.
Right.
So,
Which that's kind of how it was before, because that's like the replacement gold pass, I think.
but the names are stupid. They needed to pick.
Oh yeah, the names are stupid.
Yeah.
Pick one thing, stick with it.
So for the people that don't have this on their radar, we've got the Pixie Dust Pass, the Pirate Pass, the Sorcerer Pass, and the Incredi Pass. All of which kind of correspond similarly to the other tiers. They're just not like the, gold, platinum, whatever they were before. The Incredi Pass is the one that's available to everyone, even non-Florida residents. And everything else under that would be Florida residents, except for the Sorcerer Passes, the DVC, like Kirsten said. These names are awful. Yes, I will absolutely give you that. But the other thing that I saw about this, and this is totally horrible for a visual or a audio medium to talk about, but the infographic that they released also looks like a Buffalo Wild Wings menu.
It certainly does.
It does. I haven't noticed that.
The
Somebody
black
pointed
and
that out
yellow
on
color
Twitter.
scheme is not good.
Yeah, someone pointed that out on Twitter, and I have not been able to not see it since then. It's so bad. But for these, the pricing of them, Pixie Dust Pass is $399 plus tax, or $19.99 per month after a $205 down payment. You get all of the usual perks. This one has the blackout dates and everything during peak holiday periods, and you get 3 reservations at a time as opposed to some of the other ones where you get more. Pirate Pass is $699 plus tax, or $45 a month for Florida residents after a $205 down payment. Same thing, you get all of the other perks, except you get 4 park reservations at a time, and I'm assuming the blackout dates are probably less because that's how it was with the previous passes.
Mhm.
And that's how it is with Disneyland. So yeah.
Yeah, that would just make sense. If they don't, that's kind of horrible for a $300 increase. Sorcerer Pass is $63 per month, or $899 plus tax. You get to visit all of the parks. Same blackout periods. You get an additional reservation on this one, and then the Incredi Pass, which is the big one with no blackout dates, 5 reservations, and that's $1,299 or $100 a month. So, Brian, now that you've had the chance to look at these and review, did you guys renew your passes yet?
Yes, we actually did just a few months ago, so we are like grandfathered in for a good bit until we have to decide on these.
Okay. As a Florida resident, does any of these do any of these feel like they would translate to the pass you already have, or do you feel just totally lost? I know you said that that's a complication for these things, but I kind of want to get your take on this.
So since we moved down here, we have been platinum pass holders just because we really enjoy the water parks, and it was the only pass that didn't have blackout dates, which I think is it's important to us because we like to just kind of pick up and go when at all possible, which really means that the only thing comparable to what we have now would be the highest level Incredipass, and it's quite a price jump. I don't think it's to the point where it's not worth it to us. I would imagine that we would renew with that when we do it again, because the way we look at it is that we go at least once a month and usually much more than that. So this is still we're paying way less a month for the passes than we would to buy a ticket once a month. So in that light, yes, it's cheaper.
Do you think you're still going to be going once a month in a few months?
Now, okay, obviously when Jordan has the baby, then we will probably, not be going as often. But I think by the time this comes around, which she'll be, I guess about 9 months old, we'll probably be back to going somewhat regularly.
Practically grown.
Yeah. We got to get that time in before we have to start paying for her. So.
That's what I was just about to say. I feel like you've got to kind of capitalize on that free park ticket.
This is Eli's first time we have to pay for him. I'm not happy.
Ooh, that's rough. But I don't. It is still pretty shocking to see the price increases, though. It's turned from a no-brainer for us to have the passes to okay, we're getting closer and closer to kind of that break-even point. So I don't know. I still think that especially for Florida residences, the passes are pretty hard to pass up if you are a big Disney fan, like I'm assuming anybody that listens to this podcast is. But that being said, it's a big price increase, and if you're somebody that doesn't mind having some of the blockout dates, I mean the difference between the Sorcerer Pass and the Incredipass, $400. That's a chunk of change. So especially if you're a family, that's huge. So I don't know. I don't see Disney selling as many Incredipasses as they were selling Platinum Passes a couple years ago.
I mean, maybe that's their goal too.
That's a good point.
We also didn't talk about the additional plus to it, where you can customize your pass, as Disney's been calling it, to add photo pass and water park options for an extra $100, which I feel like that's kind of we talked about this before. Disney's kind of becoming like the a la carte vacation, and it's weird.
And that was one of the things that kind of pushed us to doing Platinum Plus passes, was that it was kind of just like, you know what, we'll pay extra, but we know whatever we want to do, we can just go do it. If one day we wake up on a Saturday and we say, let's go to Typhoon Lagoon, we'll just get in the car and we'll go. And it's like, now that's not really what Disney wants you to do. And it makes sense because Disney doesn't really make any money off of that. But it does kind of suck that, like you said, it's becoming more a la carte between this, the additions here to the annual passes, to adding fast passes and everything. It's like there's no more of that just kind of all-inclusive thing for big Disney fans. You gotta pay as you go.
We also haven't talked about how they're saying that there are going to be limits on the number of annual passes they sell, which to me, this feels like what's it called, where they're like perceived rarity, where they're going to be like, yes, there are limits. keep buying them. And,
So-
like, I don't know, because I've seen posts on like Disboards and stuff like, when do you think annual passes will sell out? And I'm like, dude, I highly don't see that happening.
The other thing with it too is it's new annual passes that are limiting. So it's not renewals, which, like, first of all, I'm pretty sure they gave the renewal email out to like people that were about to renew. So that shouldn't be an issue for anybody that's already got a pass. And I feel like them limiting it isn't going to be a huge deal, because at what point, like you said, it's almost like the perceived point of all of this. Like, what can they possibly cap it at where it's, both profitable and, I don't know.
I don't think they're gonna cap it. I think they're just saying that. But hey, I could be wrong. They could sell out tomorrow. We'll see.
Well, I'm curious as to, like, on the average day, how much of the park is made up of pass holders. Like, are pass holders really contributing to the crowds that much that Disney would want to limit them? Because I don't feel like it is.
See, the thing that I could see them limiting is the out-of-state passes, right? Like, I mean, I guess they do kind of lose money more on the Florida residents, because for you could make an easily just out of the blue visit to the parks. I could see them limiting it more on the like the out-of-state guests, just because they could possibly make more up front with it. Like, I don't know. That's the part that I guess is confusing to me.
Well, see, I think that they will not limit. I think that out-of-state pass holders are probably of the people who go regularly, probably some of their biggest spenders, because, like, I know whenever we go, I spend a lot of money, and I'm not even to the level where I need an annual pass because I go that much.
Yeah. I don't know. I would be surprised I think you're right. I'd be surprised if that is a thing that they do, but it's so weird. This whole situation is all weird, and it feels very weird to be a Disney fan right now.
Yeah. I really wish Beth was on tonight, because, from my perspective, it's like, okay, obviously, like, it still makes sense for me because I get to go so often, but she's in that very, like, middle area where she takes a couple trips a year. She does some, like, semi-impromptu, like, weekend trips. So I'm curious if it's worth it for her anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it's still going to be. And honestly, I think maybe this just warrants a whole nother discussion on, like, what Disney was like pre-pandemic versus what it's going to be like now, especially because we're starting to see more people traveling. Maybe that's something we should do. And just discuss the price differences, because I feel like the one that took the least big hit was probably the Platinum. Like, the prices from what I saw outside of renewal rates seemed pretty standard for what they're at right now. But I don't know, because I've never bought a pass.
There's price increases. I'd have to look. I think, don't quote me on this, I'm not sure, but I think it cost me and Jordan, like, both, to have a platinum pass right now. It's like maybe 160 to 170 ish a month. So I mean, it's an extra $30 to $40 a month with this, which I guess isn't a huge amount, but it's like we keep saying, it's every year. It's like at some point you look back 5 years ago and think, damn, it was a lot cheaper back then.
Yeah, and I think that's like, if we were to look at it that way, I think the best way to look at it would be the year-over-year increase. So, like, instead of what was it 5 years ago versus what it is today, like, what were the increases every year, and what's the difference there? Because that may actually make this make some sense.
Yeah.
But I think we should that's probably, like, you're right, a good discussion for when Beth comes back. Yeah, so I guess that would move us into our actual segment this week, if you want to take it away, Brian.
Sure. So we decided we were going to do another Imagineer spotlight this week, and I wanted to mix it up a little bit because I know a lot of the Imagineers that we have focused on have been, the first generation Imagineers, which, obviously credit where credit's due. There's some of the most famous and some of the, most respected Imagineers because they were the ones that really started it. But I wanted to do something on somebody from a kind of a different era of Imagineering, and I landed on Tony Baxter, who I think is one of the more well-known Imagineers that wasn't really in with the OG Imagineer crowd. And I also love the fact that he feels to me like he's one of us. Like he's one of the Disney fans that made the dream happen, It's
one of the ones that made it.
Exactly. It's like we always talk about oh man, how awesome would it be to be an Imagineer? And he did that. So I wanted to give a little bit of his story and history and talk about some of the stuff that he's done, and let me hold on to the dream that maybe one day I could be an Imagineer too. But yeah, so Tony Baxter was born on February 1st, 1947 in Los Angeles. And like many children of the time, he enjoyed watching Disney programs on television, and most notably the Disneyland program that was showcasing the work that Walt was doing to the upcoming theme park. And I loved they said that he was so inspired by watching this show that as a kid he would go out in his free time and build little model mock-ups of the attractions that he had seen on the show in the backyard. And I thought that was too cool because it's like he ended up doing that kind of for real in the future. So but because Tony had the privilege of living in Orange County, that meant that when the real Disneyland opened in 1955, that he was able to visit fairly regularly. And he was, like most kids that visit the parks, just immediately hooked, and he had this dream of working in the parks and building his ride mock-ups, but, doing it for WED. But unfortunately, Disneyland did not employ 8-year-olds, and in fact, 17 and a half was the youngest age that one could be to work in the parks. So Tony had this dream of going in there and getting a job, and at 17 years old, shortly before he had reached the age of 17 and a half to be able to actually get hired on, he took a tour of WED Enterprises and got to see some of the work that they were doing at the time. And because they were wrapping up stuff for the New York World's Fair in 1964, he got to see the development that they had done on the Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln animatronic. And this was what really solidified it. He was so enamored by how lifelike the animatronic was that he said, "Yep, this is it. I want to become an Imagineer." But WED wasn't going to hire a 17-and-a-half-year-old without experience. So Tony went and applied elsewhere in the parks, and he got hired on as an ice cream scooper at the Carnation Plaza Gardens on Main Street. And so he got his foot in the door. He was now a cast member working in the parks, and over the next couple of years, he would work at a number of positions at Disneyland, while he was also attending school at Cal Poly Pomona for landscape architecture. But he still had this big dream of becoming an Imagineer, so he ended up transferring schools to California State University, and he changed his major to theater design. And this, I wanted to see if this was something. I'm glad you're on, Kirsten, because I don't know how realistic it is to do this anymore. But I was reading this story, and it said that Tony Baxter, when he was working at breaks at Disneyland, he would, I don't know, they never said if he was like sneaking in or if he was actually allowed to go in, but he would go into all of like backstage areas where they were working on attractions at the time. I feel like now that would be a big no-no.
Like building attractions?
Yes.
Yeah,
like for
no.
example, I wouldn't think so. So
Which
I don't know if he
honestly,
had snuck in.
that's kind of sad. Like you hear these stories, and I feel like there are never stories from our generation of like they started out as this and they worked their way up, and now they're
Yeah.
the president of Disney World, and it's like I don't know. I feel like that's one of those things. Now it's like you have to input your resume 5 times to even get an interview somewhere. Like if Walt were starting out today, I don't think anything like what he created would happen. Like it just wouldn't. And so, yeah, that's part of the thing is like, I want to hear a story about an Imagineer, who's like 40, who, was working there 5 years before me doing some mundane job. And I just don't think it happens anymore. Anyway, that's a whole nother issue I have. But no, I definitely
Yeah.
was not privy to any of that, and I would have gotten fired immediately. Yeah.
Well, according to this story, Tony Baxter was going around the backstage areas, and at this time, Pirates of the Caribbean was kind of nearing the completion of its construction. And while he was trying to catch a sneak peek of the rides, he happened to run into Imagineer Claude Coates. And instead of telling him to get out of the area, Claude, who was one of the Imagineers that was, heavily involved with the attraction, decided to give Tony a full backstage tour of Pirates, which that's just a dream come true. And so at this point, it's just like one thing after another is happening, and Tony Baxter has this dream, this passion that he wants to become an Imagineer. So during his time as a teenager and while he was working at Disney, this was very interesting, but he started making this marble maze toy as a personal hobby. And it started out as just this little like small run that the marbles would go through. But over time, he kept developing it and adding to it and extending how long the marble maze was. And eventually, an executive at Disney saw it, and he told Tony that he should keep working on this. That this was really cool. And so he started adding more lengthy sections to it, making more precise little traps for the marbles to go through. And the final iteration of this thing, he would drop a marble in it to start, and it would take it over 5 minutes to travel through this marble maze. So he took this marble maze, and he also did a senior design project for his school about creating a Mary Poppins attraction. And so he took this portfolio of stuff that he had designed for this Mary Poppins attraction, along with this marble maze, and presented it to WED and said, "Hey, this is basically my resume. What do you think?" And they hired him.
I feel like if any place to do something like that, it's Disney. Like,
yes, like I have a marble maze and a Mary Poppins attraction. Can I have a job, please? But
I'm gonna do this when I'm there.
I love that like.
I'm gonna build something.
Yeah, please let me know how that goes.
And I'm gonna find somebody important and be like, "Hey, yeah." Anyway.
But it's just like you were saying earlier, that doesn't happen anymore. You don't work your way up from like scooping ice cream to becoming an Imagineer today. Now, I may be wrong. If somebody has that story, please write in and tell us. But yeah, this is.
Did you really just ask for someone at Disney Imagineering to write to us? Because I feel like that's a tall ask there, Brian.
If you are a Disney Imagineer that started out as an ice cream scooper and then you presented a marble maze and got a job at Imagineering. I basically am trying to get Tony Baxter to come on the podcast. So, but I just think that that's so cool to like walk in there with that stuff, because I mean, obviously it shows how passionate he was about this to make this his senior design project. But also to show that like to do something completely off the beaten path, just to show this marble maze and say, hey, this is some of the ideas of off the wall creativity that I can bring. And you couldn't do that nowadays. You have, like Kirsten was saying, we have to have a resume, we have to have a degree. We can't walk in with this stuff. But I just thought that was a very cool story, just to show that he was willing to work from kind of humble beginnings and then become an Imagineer like he always wanted to. But he also got hired onto the company in kind of a whirlwind time, because Disney World was opening in less than a year, and at the time they had so many of the top Imagineers working across the parks on different things and trying to get Disney World ready, that there was no time really to get caught up to speed on what was going on. Tony Baxter was pretty much immediately thrown into the fray, and he got sent to Florida just a few short months after getting hired to serve as the field art director for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So yeah, it's pretty crazy to think this guy's straight out of college, a little more than a kid at the time, and he's given a pretty major task for like the first thing he's doing in Imagineering. And it wasn't too much later that he was given his actual first attraction design project, only 1972. So he's really only been with the company for about 2 years at this point. So just to give an idea of how long stuff takes to develop at Disney, especially during this time, it's 1972, and at this point in time, every attraction that had been built in Disneyland or Disney World had at least been a continuation of a project that Walt had been directly involved in. And so now it's 7 years after his death that they are finally starting from scratch on a new attraction, which I think just goes to show how much, forethought and planning ahead that Walt would do for the development of the attractions that went into his park. But they are now ready to start on something new, and they decide to give the task to this relatively new up-and-coming Imagineer, Tony Baxter. And what they were wanting to do was design a thrill ride that would be able to be placed in the parks on both coasts. So, with Tony Baxter leading the project, he looked into some of the work that Mark Davis had worked on for some inspiration. And a few years prior, Davis had done some initial development on an expansion to Magic Kingdom called the Western River Expedition. But the project that Mark Davis had come up with was just absolutely massive, and Imagineering eventually decided that it was going to be too expensive for them to implement it into the park. And especially with all the recent costs that the companies had put forward in expanding Disneyland and just the initial building of Walt Disney World. So it got put on hold. But one of the attractions that Mark Davis had proposed was a runaway mine train roller coaster. And so Tony saw this, and he thought that they could really take this attraction and just work it into the theming of Frontierland and not have to do this big expansion at either park, and it would really fit. And thus, work on Big Thunder Mountain began. But unfortunately, like many things in early Disney development, it was put on hold because the resources had to be directed somewhere else. And in this case, that was the completion of Space Mountain. So Tony and almost all the other Imagineers were pulled off to help with that. But this actually ended up kind of being a blessing in disguise, because after Space Mountain wrapped up and was opened in 1975, this time delay meant that Imagineering had started bringing in computer-aided design programs into attraction development before everything else was done on paper, and as we all know, took a lot of time and a lot of resources to do and design from the ground up. And now that Tony was off of Space Mountain and able to turn his sights back onto Big Thunder, he was able to implement some of these CAD programs, which allowed them to develop this attraction much more quickly and give them a lot greater detail in the finer elements of the ride. It still blows my mind to think that some of the attractions, many of them that are still running today, were designed really completely without computer technology.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane.
As somebody that uses CAD every day at work to do relatively simple things, to think that these complex attractions were done just by hand it's incredible to me. But construction on Big Thunder Mountain began in Disneyland in 1977, and 2 years later, Big Thunder opened on September 2nd of 1979. And this was followed up shortly in Disney World. Their version opened in 1980, and then this was such a popular attraction that 2 more iterations were opened up later down the road. Tokyo Disneyland's in 1987 and Disneyland Paris in 1992. Over the next couple of years, Tony Baxter began working on 2 other major projects. The first one was a remodeling of Disneyland's Fantasyland. They were trying to take the overall theme from the Renaissance kind of tent style pop-up thing that they had been doing for a while and turn it more into a Bavarian village. And with this update, they introduced a new dark ride, which was Pinocchio's Daring Journey. So they were bringing a big thematic change to it, but while they were doing this, they were also trying to update everything now that we're bringing computer technology much more into the parks and just Imagineering as a whole. So they were able to go through, and all of the rides that were mechanically controlled were updated to be computer controlled. So at this point, in the late 70s, early 80s, Disneyland's Fantasyland was really actually the most technologically advanced area of any of the Disney parks, which is kind of odd to think because it doesn't seem like many of the attractions are really that technically impressive, but they were using all computer controls, whereas that didn't trickle into the other areas of the park until much later. I'm going to try this for the 3rd time. I've got it this time. Okay, the second major project that Tony was working on concurrently was for the newly opened Epcot Center at Disney World. He was tasked with creating a dark ride to be held in the Imagination Pavilion that would peer into the creative process of the mind. So he needed to come up with characters to add. Well, he was coming up with the entire attraction idea, but they were able to cut costs by pulling in a number of characters and scenery from a scrapped project from Disneyland that was called Discovery Bay. So Tony was getting to work on taking this Discovery Bay attraction project and kind of making it his own. And the spark of creativity that really turned this into the attraction that we know today came from kind of an unlikely source. And to quote Tony, I was watching Magnum PI on TV. He was in the garden, and the butler Higgins had all these plants, and they were all uprooted. It was a mess. Magnum had been hiding a goat out there, and the goat had eaten all the plants. Higgins said, Magnum, come out here. Look at this. Something's been eating all the plants in the garden. And Magnum says, oh, it's just a figment of your imagination. And Higgins said, figments don't eat grass. And I thought, there's this name, this word Figment, that in English means a sprightly little character. But no one has ever visualized it. No one's ever drawn out what a figment is. So here's a great word that already has a great meaning to people, but no one has ever seen what one looks like. So we had the name, and I was just waiting for us to design the shape for it. So it's weird to think that this one little tidbit out of an episode of Magnum PI was what really became the inspiration for Journey into Imagination.
That's another thing I miss, like, just totally blue sky, like attractions. I don't know, and maybe there are some more recently, but I can't think of anything recent that's not based on, IP. I feel like we've discussed this before, but I mean, Soarin', kind of, but I don't know. I feel like that doesn't count to some degree.
So I guess technically that is like the last one that did come out that wasn't based on anything, right?
I think so. That's the last thing I can think of.
Yeah, and that's a part that that was really challenging for them at the time. I mean, I know we talk about it now, but back in the day too, when they were creating an attraction, it was usually either not really character driven, or if it was based off of characters from existing IPs, which makes it kind of easy to just say, well, we'll just throw the character in there. They already have the backstory. We're just kind of showing them in an attraction. But when he was developing Figment and Dreamfinder for Journey to Imagination, he talked about how challenging it was because we have 4 minutes, to develop characters and make you fall in love with them. And it's extremely challenging in this medium. And, when you think about it, it really is. Imagine if you were, given 4 minutes to tell a story, to draw, even to do a cartoon. It's like it's hard to create an emotional connection with the character in that short of amount of time.
That's a good point. I guess when I think about the originals, like Haunted Mansion, Tiki Room, like these things just totally came out of their minds. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So Tony Baxter got underway with the design for Figment, and eventually he would become the dragon we know today, or as Dreamfinder would put it, 2 tiny wings, eyes big and yellow, horns of a steer but a lovable fellow. From head to tail, he's royal purple pigment, and there, voila, you've got a Figment. So Baxter and the other Imagineers now had the character of Figment, but like I said, Figment didn't have his character yet, so they had the challenge of going through and giving him this, whimsical, lighthearted, kind of wide-eyed child sort of characterization to go along with the Dreamfinder, who was, more inspirational. And they ended up creating these 2 characters that just meshed perfectly together and ultimately really stood for what the Imagination Pavilion and Epcot as a whole was trying to do at the time. So, so as we know, the attraction opened. It was great. It was fantastic. Never changed because it was so good and beloved to this day in the same way it was at its opening. Yep.
Oh, that's wow, unfortunate.
Yes. It does make me sad to think that, something that these Imagineers poured so much work into has become what it is
Fallen
today.
so far. I think that unfortunately, I think that's we've talked about that one. That's the victim of a lot of bad management decisions.
Yes. But here's hoping that one of these days we'll have Dreamfinder again and something at least closer to Tony Baxter's original design.
You guys remember, I don't know if this is jumping far ahead in your thing, but do you remember a while ago where they had there was a rumor going around that he was coming out of retirement to redo Journey into Imagination because he made an offhanded comment that he would like to be involved in it.
I do remember that.
I so wish that was true.
That would be nice. All right. Well, the next major project that Tony Baxter worked on was Spaceship Simulation Ride. They would give guests a selection of different experiences each time they got on it. And the ride would also be themed after a massively popular blockbuster smash hit. What was it? That's right. The Black Hole that was released in 1979. So basically, what had happened was Disney Imagineering, with Tony Baxter at the helm, had kind of decided that they were going to do this spaceship simulation ride. And they were planning to have it coincide with the release of this. I had never heard of this movie before, but it was a Disney movie that was released in 1979 called The Black Hole, which was about space travel. It was a sci-fi, and it was an absolutely massive flop. So as soon as it came out and they lost all this money on it, they immediately put the idea for this ride on hold. At the time, it was estimated that the cost of the ride was going to be over $50 million. And this is like this is the late 70s. And after the movie flopped, they were just like, yeah, that's not a very good investment for us to make. But as we know, no good idea in Imagineering ever truly dies. And by the mid-1980s, Disney had approached George Lucas to team up with him on the Captain EO attraction. And in the middle of this partnership going very well, they decided to kind of push their luck and see if they could use the licensing from the Star Wars franchise and pick back up on this spaceship simulation ride. And George Lucas was all over it. He decided to not only allow Disney to use the licensing for this, but he was actually took a huge part in the development of the ride. He, along with Industrial Light and Magic, were the people that actually produced the film that was displayed on the ride originally. So while they were working on that, Imagineering purchased these 4 military-grade flight simulators that would eventually become the ride vehicles that guests were in. And this was really cool, which I didn't realize until I was doing this, was that basically, Industrial Light and Magic and George Lucas gave Disney the film and was like, here you go. And so Disney took the film, and the way that they did this was they literally brought in a pilot, had them play the film, and had the pilot manually control the movements in the simulator and sync them up with the film. And then they recorded those movements and eventually meshed them together to make the attraction. But I just thought, like, that has to be one of the coolest jobs in the world. Like, being a pilot already is cool enough, and then you get brought in to, like, develop this attraction, and it's like you're getting to fly the spaceship. Yeah. Like, how awesome is that?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So this was another smash hit that Tony Baxter had created. The original Star Tours opened in Disneyland in '87, and it was quickly followed by MGM Studios and Tokyo Disneyland in '89, and then Euro Disneyland in '92. And this is what kills me about Journey into Imagination, because in the early teens, when they decided to update Star Tours to The Adventure Continues, they brought Tony Baxter back in to help update the attraction. So it's like, why don't you do that for all of them? So we don't end up with what we have now.
Because Disney is too cheap to do that.
That's true.
Hang on, what are they too cheap to do? I left. I'm back now.
They're too cheap. They had Tony Baxter come back and work on the updates to Star Tours in the early 2010s.
Oh
But
yeah.
but they won't bring them back to do
Fixed
Journey
it,
into Imagination.
Sad. Paycheck's sure not gonna do it.
Nope, that's for sure. So, also going on around the same time, in the early 80s, there was a small section of Disneyland that was known as Bear Country, and it housed a single attraction. But what an attraction it was. We all know I'm talking about Country Bear Jamboree. And for some odd reason, the Imagineering team decided that they needed to bring another attraction into the land to expand it, which I think it would have been fine with just Country Bear Jamboree. But Imagineer Dick Nunis came up with the idea to bring in a log flume ride, and then the development of that was given over to Tony Baxter. However, initially, many of the Imagineers working on this felt like a log flume ride was really kind of cliche and felt more like a cheap attraction that you might find at a fair or something, and didn't feel like it fit into a Disney park. But inspiration struck Tony again in kind of an odd place. He was stuck in traffic on his way to work and thought, what if we take an IP and turn this into something that's much more than just your run-of-the-mill log flume ride, and decided to theme it after Song of the South. Which I know nowadays seems like kind of a controversial
choice.
Yes. And with that, work on the Zippity River Run began. But as we all know, Michael Eisner stepped in and decided that they needed to change the name to Splash Mountain to coincide with the completely unrelated movie Splash that had been recently released. It's so funny to think about this because I still do not understand how those were supposed to work off of each other. But regardless, development.
That is weird. But
yeah,
Splash was like, I feel like I underestimate how big of a movie Splash was. Like at
but
the
it's
time.
like,
Did you know that
does
Madison
literally-
wasn't even like a name that was used that much until the movie Splash, and then it became like huge, and now Madison is like a totally normal name.
I think the thing with it too, like, I know that the story is probably different than what we actually got. I feel like it was one of those things where they probably didn't want to make it themed to the movie Splash, so they were aiming for something else. But Michael Eisner was like, no, we have to promote this thing.
I feel like they hired some psychologist that came in and was just like, no, if they're repeating the word, they'll think about the movie and then they'll want to go see it. And you're just like, okay.
Sure, that works.
But regardless, you do what the boss says. So development began, and Splash Mountain quickly grew into one of the longest rides in the park. But the length of the attraction wasn't the only thing that was growing. The budget was starting to balloon as well. And when construction began after all the development in 1987, costs were already at a staggering $75 million. And just to put that into perspective, if you adjust for inflation, at the time, the entire cost of Disneyland was $80 million at opening. So this one attraction cost almost as much as the entire original park, adjusted for inflation. So, yeah. So as they're building this, by 1988, it was pretty clear that costs had gotten out of hand, and the amount of money that it was going to require to finish designing and producing this, especially with all the animatronic figures that were planned for it, just simply weren't in the budget. But as fate would have it, the birth of Splash Mountain would be saved by the death of another attraction, America Sings.
Oh gosh, that's such a good transition.
So America Sings was this stage show that had just an ungodly number of animatronic animal characters that was seeing very, very low attendance. So they decided, hey, we can close this attraction, which nobody's really coming to see, take this mess of animatronic figures that actually happen to fit in really well with the theming of Song of the South, and we'll just do that. And so they did, and really without doing this, Splash Mountain was going to not be able to be completed. So it ended up working out. It's interesting. I obviously never got to see America Sings, as before my time, but it is weird to think how much of that is literally just copy and pasted from a completely unrelated attraction, and it doesn't feel like that once it's in there, though. But that wasn't the end of the struggles with Splash Mountain. The attraction was nearly complete and scheduled to be open on July 17th of 1989. But another issue arose. They brought in company executives to do an early preview of the attraction, and instead of receiving a light spray at the final drop, they were getting absolutely soaked, like completely drenched. So they decided to postpone the opening of the attraction, rework the flumes to direct the water away from guests when they hit. But eventually, it opened up later that year and it became a smash hit. And because of its rising popularity, another version was opened in both the Magic Kingdom and Tokyo Disneyland in 1992. Over the next several years, Baxter would continue working on a number of other attractions. And this one was one that I thought was pretty cool. I didn't realize how much sheer manpower went into this, but the Indiana Jones Adventure was made up of a team of over 400 Imagineers during its development. And Tony Baxter led a quarter of them and was in charge of doing the ride layout development. But just to think that like 400 Imagineers working on the attraction, I mean, it was obviously a very, technically impressive attraction, especially for the time, but like that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he also worked on the Submarine Voyage, which was a conversion of the 20,000 or the Submarine Voyage ride. And so now we see that Tony Baxter, who has started out from pretty humble beginnings as a ice cream scooper, has worked his way up, made just a number of smash hit attractions, and has now become the senior vice president of creative development for Disney Imagineering. And like we said, you don't see it nowadays, but it's still cool to think that somebody like was able to do that. That like one of the Disney fans made it. It's like he is out there living not only his dream, but the dream that so many Disney fans have had over the years.
I'm pretty sure 3 Disney fans right here, at least.
Yes. In 2013, he was officially awarded his Disney Legend status for his years of work in Imagineering. But later that year, he received the true highest honor that is bestowed upon a Disney employee, and he was given a window on Disneyland's Main Street, which, I mean, Disney Legend status is cool, but come on, like, Main Street Window Club. Yeah, Main Street Window Club is a much smaller club than Disney Legends Club.
For sure.
Yeah. So in total, Tony Baxter had a 47-year tenure at Disney. Most of it spent in Imagineering. He officially retired in 2016, but it looks like his run is not completely over. In 2020, he rejoined Imagineering to work on the Splash Mountain update as they're turning it into the Princess and the Frog ride. And I think that that's really cool. You know, like we were saying with him getting brought back for Star Tours and us wishing that he had for Journey to Imagination. I think it's very cool for Imagineering to step in and say, hey, you know, we're taking this attraction that is really beloved by guests and we're needing to update it. Let's, you know, bring in the person that was a part of that original inspiration that made it so beloved by fans and make him part of the update. So I really wish that they would do this as much as possible, because I think this more than anything like gives me the hope, or you know, the feeling that this update is going to be a really good attraction and it's not going to feel like a cheap overlay.
Yeah, and I don't think he's ever going to be truly gone.
No, you know, you say that, and it feels that way with almost every Imagineer. You know, it's like even after they've retired from the company, it seems like that is still such a big part of who they are, of like, you know, their fandom, and just it feels like if you're a Disney Imagineer, especially like one on this level, that it's kind of becomes a part of you, you know? And it's good to see that definitely seems to be the case for Tony Baxter, as he's coming back to do some more work for him. And obviously, you know, like we said at the beginning, this is something that he had dreamed to do, and he made it happen. So obviously, when that's been a you know, something you've wanted to do for so much of your life, and then it happens, like that's always going to be a part of you. So I really loved doing this, you know, research with on Tony and everything, because like I said, this is, you know, it's my dream too. So it's very cool to see how successful he was, and you know, just from striving to do something, put his mind to it, and he did it. And look at all the stuff that he's done over the years. Just an incredible resume.
Stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.